On a rainy day in May of 2019, I walked around an outdoor event called World Village Festival. I walked with my partner, pushing a pram with my toddler in it, past tents large and small, containing vendors of food and crafts and people giving out flyers, when I saw at the crossroads of the path figures wearing red sheets, covering their whole bodies with only eyes cut out. Red ghosts. I felt shocked and intrigued, and I pointed them out to my partner. I looked at the name on the tent they were standing in front of and recognized the name from recent election posters all over the city. SKP, the Finnish Communist Party. In the preceding weeks, I had been reading about the deaths of communists, especially so-called Red Women, 101 years before in Finland. About the Hennala camp, a concentration camp reportedly run based on eugenic principles, years before the height of Finland's dark and in some way ongoing eugenics period. At Hennala camp, according to work by Marjo Liukkonen, there were executions and rapes. Civilian prisoners, men and women, including those who were pregnant, as well as children, died of disease and starvation. The publication of this historical work in 2018, and the public nature of the serious resistance it garnered, had fueled my feeling that Finland was haunted, and that people were being spooked by the ghosts. And now suddenly I was standing in front of red ghosts. I rushed forward to speak to the ghosts. I asked one what his outfit meant, and he declined to speak in English and directed me to someone else in his group, who looked at me for a moment and then responded with a strange smile and a chuckle, giving a contradictory answer, which included them being ghosts of the past and of the future, specifically ghosts of future victims of climate change. Then he smiled again and thanked me for asking the question. Avery Gordon, in her book Ghostly Matters, says, "Haunting is one way in which abusive systems of power make themselves known, and their impacts felt in everyday life, especially when they are supposedly over and done with, or when their oppressive nature is denied. Haunting raises specters, and it alters the experience of being in time, the way we separate the past, the present, and the future." In reading Gordon, after experiencing the hauntedness of Finland during my fieldwork, I came to agree with her that ghosts are not aberrations, but are central to modernity itself. And I have come to conceptualize Finland as haunted in a way that specifically follows her, which is an evocative way to conceptualize modern forms of dispossession, exploitation, and repression that concretely impact the lives of marginalized people and impact our shared conditions of living, such as the racial capitalism and the white supremacist repro-nationalism embedded in Finnish life. Gordon's notion of haunting is not the same as being exploited, traumatized, or oppressed, although it usually involves these experiences or is produced by them. What's distinctive about haunting is that it's an animated state in which a repressed or unresolved social violence is making itself known, sometimes very directly, sometimes more obliquely. Now, the point is not to eulogize fallen Reds, or those whose reproductive possibilities were curtailed against their will, or those who were ethnically cleansed. No, as Gordon points out, ghosts are never innocent. The unhallowed dead of the modern project drag in the pathos of their loss and the violence of their force that made them, their sheets and chains. Come with me. Let me explain something about how people sometimes react to being haunted. Imagine you were out for a walk one day in a wild and green place. You were looking around at the scenery and perhaps picking some berries. As you are walking without paying much attention to your surroundings, you don't realize the thicket around you, and you find you're entangled in thorny branches, briars, and brambles. You panic and pull away, but the thorns are already in your clothes, and they tear your clothes and your skin. The more you pull away, the more they pull back and hurt you. But the moment before you pulled away, you weren't hurt. The thorns were just there. Many of the most severe apparent moral failings of history, as well as the historic and continually reverberating injustices, were, bizarre as it may sound, things that people argued for on the basis that there was a worse alternative that seemed a real threat in that moment to them. Whether an unjustified fear or something grounded in historic experiences to that point. The ghosts linger because that logic is not gone. Whatever feeling of crisis it was that precipitated those terrible acts, they can still speak to us after the fact, pulling us in. The pull can be particularly potent for those whose privilege is derived from that injustice, and becoming aware of it can feel like suddenly realizing the thorns are already in your clothing. It is the combination of a sense of horror that makes you want to draw back, and the way there is a pull on you that sets you off, spooked. A clear and illuminating example comes to us from the origin of the transatlantic traffic of humans from Africa into bondage in the Americas via the Middle Passage. Bartolomé de las Casas, a Spanish priest, was horrified by the genocide of indigenous peoples in the Americas that he was living through, and he came up with the idea to traffic and enslave Africans as a way to stop indigenous people being enslaved and wiped out. He saw what was happening in the Americas with his own eyes, how many indigenous slaves were dying, the atrocities that were committed against them. He argued for the humanity of indigenous people against those who said they were subhuman, yet his solution was horrific, unjust, and the consequences of it continue to be horrific. This has the potential to pull at us now. Can you feel the thorns? This kind of ambivalence is uncomfortable. It's even more uncomfortable for some than others. When it threatens fragile white innocence, the spooked reaction can be particularly strong. Like when the image of beautifully empowered women who come to be mothers with so much state support is complicated by things I say about the suppression of the reproduction of others. Perhaps it's best to think of haunting as a consequence of devastating moral compromise. Because I'm a Black American woman, I'm attuned to hauntings, to ghosts. This does not mean I'm looking for them, it means I can recognize them. Haunting is a familiar sensation when I come close to things, objects, topics. Ghosts and haunting have a lot of meaning for the descendants of slaves in the Americas. As Gordon says, those who do not even secure the moderate gains from routine amnesia are bound to develop a sophisticated consciousness of ghostly haunts. Indeed, we've been talking about these things among ourselves for generations. One of the few things I know about my grandmother's mother is that she used to come when babies were born and talk to her grandchildren about haints, another word for ghosts. As a descendant of both enslaved and brutalized people and those who raped and brutalized them, having spent a life in white-dominated spaces where those histories are supposed to be hidden, where growing up means learning all the cold spots to avoid the spots where the ghosts live, that telling about that history, or anything like it, is dangerous. That I will meet with resistance from those who want to assert that those things are over and done with, but also that they never happened, and moreover that if they did happen, they weren't as bad as I'm making out, and that I am bad for talking about them. What I mean is, because spooked white people are dangerous, we look out for ghosts. But there's also my feeling of horror on behalf of ghosts, which also comes down to a political commitment to pay attention. Who are you? What happened? What should we do about it? Of course, the very notion that one believes in ghosts can be stigmatizing. My maternal aunt, upon hearing that I was writing about a link between haunting and Black American people, responded with concern. Weren't we supposed to be considering such things to be stereotypes? But the subsequent conversation in which we remembered our childhoods, although in different time periods, had both involved elder female relatives telling specific ghost stories that were linked to our history in plantation slavery. Her feeling that it was the threat subsided, and she was excited by the idea that the old ghost stories can be brought into the light as something more than a figment of the imagination. Taking into account Jason Young's work in his book Rituals of Resistance, we can understand the Black American belief in ghosts and haunting and other such supernatural phenomena as ways to resist brutality and to attack the systems of modernity and rationality which underpinned the system of slavery. What I'm saying is, this analysis is resistance too. And more than that, it's an attempt to help you resist being drawn into repeating or running from those horrors in mindless terror, endangering yourselves and others. Gordon writes about animism as having a complex and expanded notion of causality that is the opposite of narcissism's tendency to reduce the magic of social encounters to the realm of the self. Can you resist the temptation to reduce this all to being in my head? So why don't I get spooked by ghosts? Well, violence, white supremacy, dispossession, none of that is new to me. Let me put it another way. Do you know anything about Brer Rabbit and the Briar Patch? Brer Rabbit is an important figure for Black people in the Americas. In our oral tradition, he's a symbol of ourselves, and he was important when we were enslaved. The tradition is based on African storytelling. In one of the most retold stories, Brer Fox, who represents the white slave owner, wants to hurt Brer Rabbit just as bad as he can. So he takes Brer Rabbit by the legs and throws him smack into the middle of a briar patch. But when Brer Rabbit is thrown into the briar patch, with its dense tangle of big thorns, he is not spooked. It is not the fate worse than death that Brer Fox thinks it is. As Brer Rabbit says, he was born and bred in the briar patch.